Start the meeting. Michael is not going to be here. He had a family situation. Is there anybody willing to take minutes for tonight only?
I will.
Thank you, Mark. Is there any public comment from the public?
Mr. Chairman, Dave Passios, 56 Whiting Street, and the chair is aware of this, and I just bring it up as a concern that it seemed very confusing last night as I was trying to determine which meetings were where for this evening. My first move usually is to go to the town calendar on the website and look at the actual calendar and pick the committees or boards that are meeting, click on those. And when I did for the charter meeting this evening, and the first window comes up, it comes up as this meeting being at 7 p.m. at the town hall. The agenda itself is correct, and as the chair notified me today, the notice on the board, which is the accepted posting place for meetings, is correct. I just find, I'm concerned that these types of errors makes it very confusing to the public to find meetings and know where correctly where the meeting is.
And just to let everybody know, the notice of the meeting gets sent to the clerk's office, and they are responsible for setting up that first page, so you go onto the calendar, you click on it, and it has a summary of what the agenda is going to be for it, and that's where it still says Town Hall, 17 Main Street. When you actually click on the agenda, we're there, and for the state law purposes, the posting outside is the correct one, and as long as that's done. But so that we'll communicate with the town clerk's office, that especially for our meeting, because we're going to probably be here most times unless there's no ZBA meeting. And if there's a ZBA meeting, we'll have it at no ZBA meeting, we'll have it at town hall. So we'll make sure that because it was posted as town hall, and then it was changed, and we didn't point that out to that part. So that's a good point. Thank you.
One other quick comment, and I know it's early on, you haven't had all that many meetings, but the Charter Review Committee is also not listed in the master list. So the only place you see meetings posted at the moment is on the calendar itself. There's no way to link to your committee on the master list.
And we'll talk to the town clerk about that as well.
Thank you.
Electronic works if there's ways to get into the electronic version.
Right.
So, thank you. Any other public comment? Any announcements from anybody on the committee?
No.
So, minutes for the last meeting did not get distributed, so we'll hold that till next time. And the first item on our discussion is board responses as a result of reaching out. Anybody want to start?
Oh, sure, I'll start. I met with the library board and informed them that we were beginning this process. I gave them, they had the materials written out and they were going to discuss it in the next couple of meetings, and I invited them to either share their comments with me or you, or to come to a meeting to discuss their comments, and if they had no comments, to notify us, and then we would move on to the next area. I did meet briefly with the cemetery people, the same memo and all that. I have not been able to get in, well, the assessors have not contacted me back, so I have no word from the assessor's office, although I'm assuming they're aware of this process. So,
Good.
I've gotten emails back from the Conservation Committee, and they didn't have any changes. And I did get something back from Tim Murphy. And you'll pass out your nice copies.
yeah, nice copies. Oh, wait.
Steve, I'm sorry, what was that last commission that you haven't heard from? Assessors. Thank you.
So you want to read it into the record?
Do you want to
Discuss
Why
it?
don't you?
Okay. Charter Review, October 25th, 2017, Charter Review Committee, Town of Lunenburg. Dear Committee, let me begin by thanking you for your service to our town and specifically for your willingness to undertake this charter review. I believe strongly that the New England Town Meeting is the purest form of democracy. Where else can any citizen, registered to vote, rise to speak and shape their town? It is America at its finest. I am concerned that the meetings are unwieldy at times, and I am open to changes in dates and times. These changes should allow all to speak while keeping the meeting time manageable so more will attend. We need to involve more residents not currently serving. I am concerned that there is a perception our town is run by a small group of like-minded residents. You may want to consider adopting the rules for the meeting set out in, quote, town meeting time, quote, end quote, unless they conflict with MGL or case law written or decided since the last publication. At every meeting, I declare that we follow those rules and laws and that copies of the book are available at the library, but they were never ever formally adopted. The charter envisions the moderator appoint a deputy every spring to serve in the moderator's absence for that year. But since I cannot solicit a deputy for an uncertain date, I have not followed this provision. When I am aware of a conflict, I find a replacement and ask someone in the meeting to rise and move the body approve that person. It makes more sense for the Board of Selectmen to have that authority. I would expect most moderators would still assist in finding a replacement. The language denoting the town clerk as a default moderator should be eliminated. I believe the moderator should appoint one citizen at large to the screening committee for replacing the town manager. As the committee is currently constituted, it is a closed group of elected, appointed members of boards and committees. We need to increase our volunteer base, and this would create another opportunity for community involvement. The language regarding removal of the town manager needs attention. Where and how is a request for a hearing filed? I suggest it be filed with the town clerk, who shall immediately notify the moderator, who then shall call the meeting as prescribed. The charter is then silent on the procedures of the meeting. The charter provides the manager may file a written response, but does not provide for an actual hearing with the right to counsel and to call witness. I suspect we can adopt some procedures from other towns or administrative bodies to meet our needs. It makes sense to have the moderator preside over the hearing. Again, thank you all. Yours truly, very truly yours, Timothy W. Murphy.
Wow.
Oh, I messed up.
You did a great job.
Good. Lots of different things to consider. So as we get these things, what I'm going to suggest we do is, if you have an immediate reaction, you can certainly say something, but I know what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to go back to the charter, read it again, and see what he was saying and other things like that, and then we can talk about it at the next meeting.
To what extent should we determine how many of these things are actually covered in the bylaws versus the charter?
I could say right now none of these are covered by the bylaws.
Okay.
You can hold me to it to the extent that I've read them, but these were things that surprised me. So I recently read the bylaws, so that part's.
But they are in the charter.
They're in the charter,
Yeah.
right. So there's various things in the charter that need to be changed or revised, but sort of, for instance, town meeting time, I've heard him talk about it a long time. We used to use Cushing's rules, and then it switched, but the concept of the charter or somebody else adopting this.
I believe the bylaws specify dates, a range of dates, specify specifically that it'd be the first Saturday in May.
Right,
That's in the bylaw,
the bylaw.
The charter says it can be any time in the spring,
April or May. Right.
so I don't know if we can change that part.
Well, one of the things, just sort of jumping to the other item, is that we have the ability, when we're done with this, to come up with recommended bylaw changes. So it will not be, it's not technically under our jurisdiction because it's not the charter, but as a result of what we're doing, we're going to say, all right, here's the recommended charter changes, here's the recommended bylaw changes, and we send that back to the selectmen to possibly have another bylaw review committee.
Mr. Chair, I just have one comment, because I've read those sections about the annual town meeting and special town meeting. I believe the paragraph about annual town meeting is very vague, but it refers all other information or procedures back to the bylaws for the annual town meeting. The special town meeting, it's spelled right out in the charter.
I really like getting the response in this format because I feel like we can file it and then compile it and then plug it in. And so I haven't gotten response yet, but I think I would encourage them to formulate a letter of response because I think that will really help not forget what people's concerns were and kind of overlap it.
Any other boards responses?
Oh, sorry, go ahead. I've reached out to the Board of Health, the Parks Commission, and the Commissioners of Trust Funds. I have not heard back from them yet. In my note to them, I excerpted their part of the charter, and it's very straightforward, so they may not have any changes, but I haven't heard back from them yet.
Okay.
Well, Finance Committee has it on the agenda tomorrow night. I did speak to someone at the PAC before. Their next meeting is November 7th, but they don't anticipate seeing themselves anywhere. And Heather is, when she gets back, going to give me a contact for the Cultural Council, so I know who to contact. And Karen, I also discussed with Heather that we would actually like to go through some of the finance things together as a finance committee, and with the accountant and the director of finance, well, with the director of finance and with Heather. And that's all I have.
I did reach out to the Council on Aging, the Capital Planning Committee, and the Personnel Committee. Capital Planning and Personnel have not had meetings yet, so I touched base with their chair, and they suggested that I would be welcome at their next meeting, which I'm planning on doing. Council on Aging did meet and discuss it. The initial response was they were comfortable with what existed, but I happen to be the liaison to that group from the selectmen, so at their next meeting I'll just make sure that, that they have one more opportunity, but I'm pretty sure that they're comfortable with what it says.
When I realized we probably need to bring back to the Board of Selectmen for us to discuss it
Right.
too, because I didn't have that on the agenda. Okay. So the next thing that, in this, some of the things we'll keep on there until we decide to take them off, but representative town meeting, I still owe you the information from Lexington. Has anyone had any opportunity to see anything else regarding?
I don't know, was anybody able to access the Google Doc?
I did.
You did, okay.
I didn't actually try to put anything in, but...
That's okay that you didn't try to put anything in.
Yeah, I accessed it well.
Yeah,
as well.
I was just curious. Because basically, one of the things that was coming, there was a couple of things coming through. One was that the towns that tend to go to representative town meeting tend to have over 20,000 population. And the Board of Selectmen thing that was interesting was that regardless of whether you're a select board or a Board of Selectmen, you're still a selectman or a select woman. So it almost doesn't really matter. But yeah, the people are either a Board of Selectmen or they're a select board. There were a few exceptions where there was representative town meetings that were smaller populations, but I wouldn't know why. Montague was one. Some of these towns I've never heard of before, and that might be because their population is 329. Aquina? It's like out of...
No, that's...
but they have open town meeting. But basically it was their representative was Auburn. Auburn is smaller and has it. But for the most part, the ones that tend to have the bigger... And that's all in the clear from the Google Doc.
Okay.
And I think the more I've thought about it, and after our discussions at the last meeting, my preference is to really go after the dates and times of the meetings, even to the point of, I think it's probable that even keeping a Saturday morning meeting, but have it time limited, so that we know it's going to run from 9 to 12, and if there's something beyond that, it'll reconvene on Monday night, so that people know what to schedule. And then that way, I know one person's concern was, if you do it at night, then you lose older people. If you do it in the morning, you lose younger people. But it sounded like from the meeting that you folks had that one of the things I hadn't even considered was that if you're going with the thought that you're going to be gone all day, you might be less inclined to go. And I think the other thing that, like we thought about was we haven't been able to we haven't had a situation where a town meeting couldn't start because there was no quorum. We just couldn't continue. But I think if people knew that everybody was leaving at 12, then I think that people would stay until 12. But those are just my thoughts on it after our last meeting and discussion.
And I will agree, I think we need to research times and dates before we change forms of government.
Monday is very popular in most of the towns that I've been through.
Right, Monday to Tuesday.
And they're all over the place. I mean, April, June, May,
Did you pick up a sense of how many have established permanent 2 meetings? I mean, because that seems to come up, but I don't know if that's...
I didn't, but it's, and I don't know if you saw the links to the page with the links to all of the town websites, which is also very informative, but there are a number that don't call it special, they'll call it subsequent, and they will put in their charter, I believe, or somewhere that there is definitely a fall town meeting. There is a spring and a fall, so people don't rush to get...
Semi-annual town
I've seen
meeting.
signs for October meetings everywhere in Ayer, Groton, so I don't know if it's just become the norm for towns to have to need a fall one, and I think that would be a really smart thing to make it permanent, and then everybody can work around that. Just like they do in the spring, there's such good structure preparing for it. I think it would be nice to create that structure for the special town meeting.
And not call it special, we would just call
always
it
going to
subsequent.
happen, then it's not special, right?
Or maybe the time can be shorter in the spring, because some things can
Yeah,
be
you can...
Right.
dealt with.
There was also one town that actually, I think, identified that one part of the meeting was for budget-related stuff. And then there was, they separated out any of the bylaw or policy changes. I mean, it's been a fascinating look. I just go back to, I had no idea that everybody had town meetings. It was new to me. But it has been helpful going back and forth, and I do think that the notion of a second town meeting is good, and I think the reason why more people are probably doing it more consistently is probably tied in with new growth numbers becoming available and people needing to get that on the books.
I think it would help involvement too. Like Groton has a banner for their October meeting, and so does Ayer and their Rotary, and it's like if it's something you're always doing and always advertising, I think that would lend itself to increased involvement. Like how many people know there's a town meeting coming up? Probably a handful.
The other reason a lot of people have the fall town meeting is because you adopt the budget in May, and the legislature doesn't vote the final local aid number until June 30th, if you're lucky, if not the beginning of July.
Right.
So it's before you set the tax rate, because we have the quarterly bills, the first 2 bills are estimated. We have to set the tax rate and get bills out by December 31st. So that's why you have it in the fall, so you've got the ability to do that whole process, classification schedule and stuff like that. So I think I like the idea of saying, all right, do a consensus process. Well, when should we have a fall meeting? Because when we talked about setting it, you don't want to have it too close to Thanksgiving because people have travel. You don't want to do between Christmas and Thanksgiving and Christmas because of the issues and then snow and other things like that. So maybe we just set automatically there's a date, whether it's at the end of October, beginning of November, whatever it ends up being. I think that makes sense. Does anyone here currently, without a vote, currently think that we should continue to think about representative town meeting?
I did a fair amount of research as well. The number of towns that have representative town meeting is relatively small. I don't know what would compel us to do something different before we try these other things. Trying to get better attendance at town meeting, I think is the answer, not changing our form of government.
I would agree with that.
Mr. Chair, could I make a comment if you
Sure.
don't mind? I've Personally, one of my employers, who has since, actually in the last year or so, passed away, but he was a resident of Lexington, and we had multiple conversations about the representative town meeting process that they had in Lexington, and it was his feeling, and he lived in a neighborhood of older residents that have been in Lexington for many, many years, and the feeling was that they had not been represented, that particular group had not been represented by the representative, whoever was supposed to represent their desires, that, nothing they approved aligned with what they wanted.
So the one thing I will take from Lexington, and it's not in their charter because it's not an official thing, is they created a mechanism for communication before the town meeting. They set up a system by educating the representatives of what was going to be on the town meeting warrant. So there was material sent out in advance, briefing documents, hearings, separate from the hearing requirement for zoning, hearing requirements for any particular thing, but it was actually set up for the representatives in advance, not to preclude discussion at town meeting, but to actually inform it so that they could then do more work in advance. So I will get that process when we talk about trying to enhance town meeting participation. We're looking at the scheduling, the alternate days, the time limited, process, marketing, setting the second town meeting in the fall, all the things that we can talk about doing.
Also, the charter, it's an all or nothing approval by the group. So, right, so if you're trying to change it and get it adopted, if there's something in there that could be considered controversial, any other positive changes would just not happen and you'd be left with your charter as is, correct?
Right, if it doesn't go
So
through.
I think that's another reason to stick with things that really make sense as like a way to see it as improvements or corrections, that if you put something like moving to representative and that is the sole reason people vote down the charter change, anything else we worked on,
Disappears.
Yep.
it just stays as is.
Yep.
So that would be a risky move even if it were pursued, but I would leave it open by my choice.
I know that Lexington's meetings started on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and they would go to the next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, depending on how they did it. So that was their schedule.
But only the representatives went. Well, anyone could go,
Anyone could go,
but
but
basically it was just representatives.
because the reality is, no matter whether it's representative or town meeting, you have a certain amount of work that you have to get through, and whether it's representative or open, you have a certain amount of discussion. And theoretically, everybody's going to discuss the controversial issues more, and then the other ones will be simpler. The question becomes whether everybody has a chance to actually get all the issues out there. Okay, so we've got a little bit more structure for what we're looking at town meeting. We'll continue to look at alternate days. People can do some work on seeing that. I agree, at a minimum, we should be doing 9 to 12 on a Saturday. If we do nothing else, just say it's going to end at noon, whatever article we get to. The way they usually do it, you don't take up any new article after noon. So if you start something at 11:59, you may be there for another hour to get it done, but maybe we need to talk about that too. No new article coming before 11:45, that you therefore then force it to actually start earlier, end earlier.
Right, and I think with the promise of a fall meeting, I think people won't rush to get stuff set for, the meeting when they're trying to get through a whole lot of other stuff.
Can I ask, Bob, are there things on the Springtown meeting that can be passed virtually any time in the year, as long as there's a schedule for review and all that? I know, like zoning board, whatever. Or most of the things have to be passed in the spring?
I think the only thing that has to be passed before June 30th is any financial one. But even then, that can change until you get your tax rate set.
So planning board, I'm thinking of all these commissions, if they have things they want to bring up, they can then plan, well, we're going to do it in the spring. Nope, we know there's a fall meeting, we're going to do it in the fall. And who's in charge of setting up the articles and what actually happens?
So there's a couple of things that happen. So if it's an article submitted by the selectman or any town department, it is set between the town manager and the department. Citizens petition is written by the citizen, possibly with help with somebody, and it's submitted in that format. There's a general structure at the annual town meeting of consent items first, then budget, then other items, then zoning, and then some other items. So there is no strict...
So things, I mean, it would take a year or two for people to realize that they could spread things out. So the manager, in effect, could say, we're going to put this one in the fall, we're going to put this one in the spring. The spring is loaded with X, Y, and Z. We need to wait.
Except for citizen petitions, right?
Yeah, except for citizens.
Yep.
But so that is something that could evolve over time. Okay. I wanted to make sure it could happen before we say, let's
So you
look
might
into
take
it.
that 1 6, 7, 8 hour day and then naturally start to
Well,
Move it out.
make it just 4 or 5
I think it also
hours.
depends, because the other thing that will happen, hopefully, I mean, if you have increased participation, which would be a good thing, you have potential for increased articles, which would be a good thing, but could basically just stretch things out. But the other thing is, from my mind, is that I think in the past, because people only anticipated one meeting, they would rush to get stuff in.
Even if it, because a lot of meetings I've gone to, sometimes we've had to pass it over because it wasn't ready to be read, or after discussion there wasn't enough information to vote on it and all that. So I'm thinking, that's why I asked that question, to make sure boards, if they understand there's going to be two, can then say, all right, we're really not ready for this one, we'll go for the next one. And then the town manager can say, this one is booked solid. You're going to need, can you wait till the fall? Can you wait till the next spring?
Right, and I think the other is that I don't know if it's already in the charter, if it's in the bylaws, or where it goes to in terms of at what point warrant articles need to be received by the Board of Selectmen to be approved for the warrant.
In section 2.
It's in the charter.
It's in the charter and the bylaws, and it's different between the two.
It's different between the charter and the bylaw?
The time of day that it's doing
Oh,
It just
that's the
says in
time of
accordance
day,
with
okay.
the town bylaws. So I think it...
So part of the thing traditionally was that everybody knew there was an annual meeting and there might be a fall meeting. And therefore, there was a feeling that it's important to have the most important articles on the annual meeting so as to not surprise people at a special. That being said, if you actually have scheduled meetings, that issue goes away a little bit of what's going on. So
I agree, and there's a connotation behind special town meeting that maybe we didn't plan properly, or we're dealing with an emergency or something that was not anticipated. And I think we have an opportunity to move away from that concept.
And I also don't know if that would then also change the requirement that for the special town meeting, a warrant article presented by a citizen has to have 200 signatures.
it's actually, it's 100.
In order to have the town meeting.
Well, that would be to call your own town meeting for the
Okay.
200.
Right.
I would say you could always call a town meeting. Right now, we could get together and call one for whatever day.
And so,
Christmas.
There you go. The day after. So part of the thing is that I think that's why, as Mark was talking about, you want to have the ability to have a special meeting.
Right.
And a special meeting is something that's unusual. You know,
Okay,
we're going to do a school bond issue. It should be by itself. It's something important. That's not a surprise. Or there was a major issue in town, there was a hurricane, we need to spend some money, a special town meeting might be appropriate. So I think that if we come up with and flesh this out, talking to various people, it's like, well, let's start asking people, if we had 2 meetings, what articles do you think you should do at the spring and versus the fall? Getting people starting thinking about that, and maybe we'll hear it from the departments. Well, I'd prefer to have my articles talked about here and not have it be around any of the money articles. Or you know.
So you could really almost get spring to be very budget focused, and then if there's zoning, bylaw changes for the planning board or something, that could definitely be a October, November thing. And I think what you were saying is if we make a permanent second meeting, then do we just have the same rules?
As the first meeting, right.
so that there's nothing different about it, because, yeah,
Right.
Yeah, it's just a town meeting.
Right.
yeah.
So then that goes to, if anyone followed my comments at the selectmen's meeting as a result of the bylaw committee, the previous town manager wanted to get rid of the 2/3 requirement for voting a financial article at a special town meeting. She wanted that to go away. I was thinking, we need to have further discussion on that. I would be okay with getting rid of that if it was a permanent meeting and maybe requiring a 2/3 vote at a special meeting. That we can have a discussion on that. So it's a little bit like, you don't want somebody to ram something through at a special meeting that's being
Right.
called, that you got to really try to get people out, as opposed to the third Saturday in October, there's always going to be a fall meeting. You're put on notice in the bylaws and the charter everywhere, but it's going to be a majority vote, not a 2/3 vote. That
And then
way.
after the meeting, you can go over to the haunted house of the Boys and Girls Club. Try it with something, yeah.
Yeah, type of homecoming.
Real quick comment, the Board of Selectmen called a special meeting in, was it August, a couple of years ago, for, I may have the wrong month, but it was a late spring or summer meeting to get authorization for one of the solar projects to sign a contract. So, we do have precedent that
Yep.
a board did actually
Mhm.
call a meeting, a special meeting.
And another one would be exercising the right of first refusal on chapter land, chapter 61. That it's a time
Where you
specific,
limit it.
you need to do that. And I think what's really good about what we're talking about now is that in some ways we're starting to write our position paper, but we're also giving examples of, here's what would be a typical special town meeting, here's what we think on a fall meeting, here's the annual meeting.
There's a practical side too, though, in my experience, we say, do we need a special town meeting in the fall? And in my experience, we always have needed one because there was one or two items that drove it. But then once you decide you're having one, anybody that has any item that needs town meeting approval kind of hustles to get it in by the next one so they don't have to wait a full cycle.
Right.
So there's the planning aspect that says, yeah, if I was going to look at my 4-year plan and say, when would I prefer to bring it to the town, I might come up with one answer. But if I'm saying, I have an idea that's probably not that controversial, but it requires town meeting approval, I want to get it on the agenda as soon as possible. It's not a preference, whether it's spring or fall, it's the next one I can possibly get done.
And one of the things that as you mentioned before, we really should be, if we know we're going to have 2 meetings, we really should be holding people to are you really ready for town meeting?
Right.
And we need to describe what is really ready for town meeting. Have you had discussions with the impacted people, the impacted boards, the finance committee if it's financial, before you actually submit it?
Right.
I'm not saying you go through all the legal ramifications, but there were times when I saw articles that the night of the warrant, and it's like, where'd this come from? Oh yeah, we've been thinking about it for 6 months. Why am I just hearing about it now? I'm not in charge of it, but I think we really need to do about how we're managing the system. Anything else on town meeting? Fall town meeting?
Just while we're talking, and in the vein of brainstorming, is 2 the right number? Could you have a quarterly one?
Well, if you needed a special one.
No, I mean, on a regular schedule, does it make any sense to have
1 or 3.
a 3-hour one every quarter?
One is just zoning.
I feel like baby steps, 2 feels like a leap.
How much does a town meeting cost?
I would know.
I've
What?
heard, not official, I've heard $5,000.
See, there's the other
In the
issue,
ballpark.
is if you start having too many, then it becomes very expensive. But I think we should look into, is there a way, maybe 3 might be the perfect number, 2 might be the perfect number, because then you could say 1 is going to be spring one financial, X, Y, and Z, and that would give people a chance to plan. Not that they couldn't bring it up at any of the town meetings, but we're going to focus.
And it seems like it's very hard to book meetings in the summer, like even just basic meetings, so I think anything ranging in that like July, August would be tough too, because you need certain town officials to commit to go to it too, and I don't know how that impacts like the entire town and not just the people choosing to go.
In fact, the charter requires that any town department head who has a subject matter is required to be at town meeting. But it's also for the citizens, you know. I remember as a kid, we came back from summer vacation for some of the school votes to try to get the new school. And so, but they kept coming back and, all right, that's not working, let's rechange it, let's come back for this one, how do we do it? So,
Doesn't, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't Mass General Law say that the spring town meeting is primarily to put a budget in place for the beginning of the fiscal year? I'm pretty sure that's covered in the general law, that, starts the whole charter process in the first place. So I think spring town meeting is a given.
Yep.
And a focus on the budget needs to be a part of that. So just want to make sure we don't lose sight of that.
Oh, no. Yeah. I agree.
Well, nothing else can happen if you don't have the budget.
Right.
You can't appropriate.
Well, we have to have one by law, right?
Right.
By July 1st.
Yes.
and it has to be balanced, as opposed to the federal government.
It can be amended later on, which
It
there'll
often is.
likely be warrants to amend the budget
Yep.
this fall.
And I think what would happen when you asked about the summer, probably the third one would probably be a January, February, maybe a March meeting, that we don't really want to wait till May because it's something we want to do. It's no longer financial, but there's something going on. So I've seen the February, March meetings too.
It's on the table for discussion.
Be interested to see what other towns do for regular scheduled meetings. Okay. Any feelings on Board of Selectmen name? Some of that came up as a way to do gender neutral, but as you stated, the statute talks about selectmen. Some do select board.
Yeah, the only other language was town council, but that was only done by towns that really are cities that want to still be called towns.
Okay.
So like the town of Framingham, might have or not the town of Framingham because they still were a town at the time, but there were others that were cities, but
Okay.
had special requests and to still be called the town of.
I mean, we can keep it on, if nobody has any feeling one way or the other, we'll just sort of keep it as a lower priority. We'll come back to it and just have a vote at some point, but it doesn't seem like there's a big push on that. Perhaps when we talk to the Board of Selectmen, we'll see what their thoughts are. So the elected board with employees. So that's the charter
We
reference.
did broaden that though, Bob,
Sorry.
to be elected or appointed, because we have some appointed boards that have employees, not necessarily that have people. So it's both, really, for discussion purposes.
Boards with employees.
Right.
That's a good way to do it. So there's three specific ones that I mentioned before: park, cemetery, and sewer.
They're all elected. The one I brought up was Pat.
And the other one is conservation.
Right.
And is there any other committee that has...
Does the planning board technically, when Marjorie's with them?
Sorry, the planning board's another...
And health too, right? What did you mention that?
Board of Health. So the sewer, cemetery, and park, when the first charter came through, the day-to-day operations were taken away from those three committees and given to the town manager, and through the town manager it has been delegated to the Department of Public Works. So that was an actual change of operations, and that's why they have specifically named some of the things there. The sewer has the added process of selecting the sewer business manager, which is similar to the planning board selection of the planning director. It is the town manager's appointment, but input with the various boards.
Who's like the library board of trustees? Because they evaluate the director.
And they hire the director. But is it stated in there?
I think it's stated that the town manager appoints and they affirm,
Okay. All right, so what we now is we need an inventory. I will take the duty to just inventory what we have. And so that would be the board, the title, who appoints,
Yeah, actually, in the charter,
How-
the library board of trustees appoints.
how...
Oh, they do appoint?
Yeah.
Okay.
See, again, the library is similar to Board of Health in that they have certain duties that the town can't impose
Yep.
things on, similar to school and similar to Board of Health,
Right.
some statutory things. How ratify, and then the part that some of these positions are union management or otherwise. So there is a review process on that. And then I want to make sure that we have the ability to reverse the action. And how would that happen? If somebody needed to be separated from that position, do you just reverse how you got them in there? And what's the mechanism? If they're union, it's a different thing, that type of thing. So I'll come up with a spreadsheet on that, and we can come back to that. Anything else you'd want to know about that? Okay.
We just want to make it so that it is consistent across the board, and the process is transparent, and these are the people, this is, and then back and forth, right? And
Yeah.
right now, it's pretty spread out.
Yep.
And you have to really look very carefully to figure out who's in charge of what specifically.
Yep. And to be the devil's advocate, I will say that it doesn't necessarily have to be the same. But if it's going to be different, we should document why it's different.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
the other part that specifically for the three departments I mentioned that relate to the DPW and the town manager, there have been issues raised about what is operations versus what is those three entities' policymaking. And when you do a day-to-day operation, when does the day-to-day operation impact policy? So and I think some of that information, so for instance, the conservation agent, I think officially reports to the town manager, but may report to the planning director. Or is there a dotted line? So we probably ought to have an org chart. And then we will see what things we need to do versus what is management that we know don't need to be involved in.
State law says your policy, correct? So what are policy and procedures? GL or whatever,
As far as
the select board.
it's going
The charter lays out
the charter lays out. So if there's no charter,
Okay, I
then you've
didn't know
got...
if the state overseed that. Okay, never mind.
So without a charter, there's all sorts of laws that relate.
Oh.
So like Board of Health has a whole chapter and
Okay.
gives all their duties and stuff. Now, part of that goes because Board of Health has been around since the 1600s. Public access is something new that's not in the charter, not in the statute, although there is a telecommunications section. So and that may be other positions, and it's actually town bylaw that the town voted to create a PAC, and therefore we have a process of authorizing that.
My experience through the school is the school committee is policy procedure, superintendent is day-to-day. And is that what what you're suggesting that we look at with the select board?
It actually would not necessarily be the select board, it would be the sewer commission. So the sewer commission adopts policies, and the town manager might do operations. Cemetery commissioner comes up with...
Okay, so
the
okay,
various...
thank you, that's what I needed to know.
Yeah.
You weren't talking...
Not
just
to the board of selectmen, no.
But, that organizational chart will come in handy. There's an umbrella groups that are in charge of policy and procedures, am I correct in saying that? And then under that are day-to-day operations.
Right.
And one of the things we'd like to do is to make sure that's clearly defined in the charter. Got it, all right. That makes more sense now.
And one of the things that, the reason we have certain boards that are elected, is my understanding is that the feeling was they were policy-making boards. So some towns have Board of Health that are appointed. And it was decided during our charter process to have them be elected because they're a policy-making board. Although they have a lot of day-to-day operations too. So,
All right.
okay, we'll come up with that part. The other thing I put on here, just to keep us reminding, a charter versus bylaw for the location. Thinking of the charter as the Constitution and bylaw as sort of operating procedures, and then there may be policies that are adopted after that, or the bylaws would be policies and procedures would be adopted by to implement those. So when we come up with making some decisions, we may say, town meeting shall be in the fall and the spring, between these certain months, as defined by the bylaw, because the bylaw is easier to change than the charter, so if we were to change it, that type of thing. Other things, we want to be absolutely sure it's in the charter, as opposed to a bylaw, because we want to make it hard to change it, because we think it's so important. So we'll come up with that. Director of Facilities was put on the agenda, that's come up a couple of discussions. We were talking about maintenance of town properties and other things like that. I would propose that are you talking with Heather? Or that was about policies, you were going to be talking with Karen?
About, fiscal stuff.
Okay. I would like to get the town manager's input on Director of Facilities as we relate to that. Over the years, there's been discussion. Everybody did their own facilities. Library did their own. Town Hall did their own. That was consolidated. I can't remember when that was consolidated. Within the last 10 years.
Right, and that's under the DPW, right?
DPW, yeah. And that's budgeted in there? Is that the town facilities, or, because there's not a
that's-
separate town hall budget?
Right.
Okay. Schools still do their own facilities. Some of that is because statutorily they're authorized to do their own duties as opposed to the rest of the town, but we've often talked about, can we do things together? Is there enough staff to pull it together? So that may be something, but I'm going to send that to the town manager. And when I say anything, this is not a fiat. Push back on me if you don't think I should be doing this, but I'm just saying the town manager should weigh in on this one before we have further
No, I
discussion.
talked about this at the last meeting because I feel like adding an employee is such a big deal and it's so expensive that in and of itself takes away money from buildings that need it. And that I think there's more of an issue with funding because so many things that buildings need are contracted out. So like they're not being done by necessarily the town employee, but the town employee in charge needs the funding to contract out whomever comes to fix whatever is needed. So I don't necessarily see needing to pay another person to be there, but to make sure we give the people there the funding that they need to contract out the services that are required by the building. So I just know sitting through all of the budget season last year and really just studying the whole process and seeing like if the fire chief wants a paramedic, what a big deal that is, and how year after year a lot of these positions are turned down and unfunded. So I just didn't see where we'd be at a point of even looking for a different type of employee when there's departments that are desperate to have positions funded already.
Right, and I'm not even sure that you're talking about a position or a new position, but basically whether or not you want to create a charter-level position. Or even if you do want to create a charter-level title.
Yeah, I don't think the assumption that it's going to add a body is valid yet.
Right.
I think it's a function of, is there somebody who cares about facilities that crosses organizational lines?
One person who oversees.
Well, some function, whether it's a person or a part of a person, or it's under the town manager's duties, or whatever it is.
Right, okay.
Is there somebody paying attention to facilities cross organizations?
The responsibilities and accountabilities need to be clear,
Exactly.
regardless of where they fall.
And then even if the person has the responsibility, I feel that they may aspire to have things be better than they are, but it comes back to funding. So the people who currently are in charge of, like the DPW director, I'm sure he would make everything dazzle and painted and fix it if the funding was there. So I don't necessarily see it as a a personnel problem, but a funding problem.
No, I don't think that we're at the funding point at all, or the personnel part at all. I think the question from my point is this something necessary for a charter change? Or is that something that could be discussed with the ongoing discussion that you folks are having around infrastructure and just trying to get a handle on all of that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's present in the charter, or it does? It's because I'm not sure. Is it because we have somebody who's responsible for roads, so you would want to have somebody responsible for something else listed in the charter? Or have that duty? Or just something to think about, and basically,
The thing is that facilities is that, we talk about infrastructure, and roads are pretty simple because the schools don't have their own roads and the parks don't have their own roads.
Right.
But the schools and the parks and the cemeteries do have their own infrastructure. They do have their own capital stuff.
Right.
And what I'm saying from a charter level discussion is there a responsibility, accountability, as Mark references, that crosses organizations that should be a charter level?
So right now, this is why this is good to do this process, under the town manager, to have full jurisdiction over the rental and use of all town facilities and property except property under control of the school, library, and conservation commission, and shall be responsible for the maintenance and repair of all town buildings and facilities placed under his control, his or her, by this charter, bylaw, or vote of the town. So town buildings and facilities. So that's
And I think that requires us to at least explore and discuss and validate, does that include parks and cemeteries? And also maybe explore, to the extent that it's reasonable or even legal under MGL, should it include schools?
Well, and the interesting thing is that
And conservation.
the library is under the jurisdiction of the DPW. And that may have been because of an agreement between the library and town manager. Conservation, clearly DPW is not taking any care of Conservation Commission. So we ought to look at what does that mean. I mean, clearly DPW is not going to be involved in determining how the library is going to be configured or anything else like that. That's their jurisdiction. Okay. So we may not need to change anything, but clearly, since this is an identified need due to lack of maintenance, whether it's because of lack of maintenance or lack of money, which is lack of maintenance too, it's important enough that we may need to highlight this. Town clerk elected versus appointed. Did you have any discussion of this last meeting?
Not really, and I think basically before really going at it, it would be probably helpful to see what a job description is for a town clerk, to see to what extent most of the duties would fall under the Board of Selectmen, or to what extent it's good to have someone who is also voted, who holds other officers responsible for stuff. Just because I don't know.
I'll get that.
And it doesn't, that's one of those things that's kind of hard to tell going through some of the different towns, other than, it's either in the charter that it's elected, or you go through and see if they're having votes for people.
Yeah, there was, it didn't seem to me that there was any consistency about whether it was appointed or elected.
Right.
And it had little to do with open town meeting versus representative town meeting.
Right.
There were towns that had representative town meeting where it was appointed, others where it was elected, same thing with open town meeting. So we're really all over.
I also think we highlight this as the type of thing that can destroy any changes to the charter.
Yep.
So any other things, everything we do could fail if this goes in there as a controversial item. So it's sort of a highlighted thing.
Yep. The other thing is Kathy has said this is her last term. So this may be an opportunity. I did talk to her, I was upfront saying that this is going to be on the agenda for discussion, and I said one of the options is to say that the current incumbent can stay in office.
Actually, that's in MGL.
Right.
If you change it from elected to appointed, the current incumbent gets to finish their term.
Right. And I actually proposed that it could be, as long as that person is elected to that position, they could do it. So it's sort of a lifetime, as long as the town continues to do it, you would still be able to be there. And that's when she said, well, I'm not planning to run another time, because she can change her mind on that part. But part of the thing was to make it absolutely nothing about her and just about the position. But
Actually, the other thing that was interesting was that there were some towns that appoint for 3 years, which I thought was interesting, that they appoint for terms.
And that's often a good thing to do, because there's so much planning. You have an election one year and you don't have it the next year, national election, then you have it the other year, and you need to do some planning, other stuff like that. I'll get some of the job description. I was president of the Town Clerks Association when I was town clerk, and there has been a move over the years to move from elected to appointed generally. Some of it pushed by the actual incumbent, because generally appointed town clerks make more money than elected town clerks, because under the state law you have to vote the elected salary every year in the budget. And we actually did reduce the elected officials' budgets at some points over the years, whereas appointed tend to be held a little bit closer, harmless. They're more of a longer-term employee, that type of thing. But I will talk to, I've got friends who are elected, and then I have friends who are appointed in the still serving. So I'll gather some of the information, because there's the association doesn't officially take a position one way or the other, but I know over the years people have made cases one way or the other, and I'll just get all that information and share it.
That would be good.
Yeah.
We had the item on there for small groups. We were talking about whether we needed to break up into small groups yet. I don't think we're there yet. I think we're still collecting the data.
We did a lot of brainstorming at the last meeting, and maybe it's because the chair wasn't in control.
That's right.
But one of the things we kind of decided at the end of the meeting was that we wanted to see what the minutes kind of said about that, and use that as some input for whether a small group should go work any of that. I think there's more than just that, but
Okay. Well, and I was looking for the minutes to see what did I miss by not being at the meeting, that type of thing. So, okay.
And I was sort of thinking too of, because we are just sort of going through things randomly, that I feel like I was lacking some structure in my mind, and at some point all together systematically going through section, like on the agenda, like as it goes along, but like we're really gonna like look at section 1 and section 2 like together and really like dissect it, right? Because right now I feel like it's a bit like
We need to
of a random
identify the
discussion.
sections that are good, fine.
Because we
Right.
could put a whole section aside and say, section this, there's nothing in it that needs change, or and all together
Or
have really...
It's a change in wording just to make it clear, or a minor change.
Like I think section 2 will take a lot of time if we change to 2 town meetings, and identifying how that changes the rules for, creating articles, and then everybody's focusing on section 2 together. And so it's less of a brainstorming and more of like a real tactical takeover of a section. I feel like that would help really start to...
I think that's a good way. So what we'll do, let's start at the beginning, and it probably won't hurt to actually read it and just, did you have any questions type thing. So we start with Article 1, which is a lot of definitions. I think it's good because a lot of the definitions set the tone for the rest.
Then there's a little bit of editing, like you meant when you were reading about the town manager, I circled where it said his. I know it's not a big deal, but it felt funny knowing that the last 2 have been women, so it's really like you can edit it better if we go through it very systematically.
Yeah, and actually I feel a need to, between now and next time, to read town meeting time.
How long is that?
It can't be that long.
No, it's a half inch. you know,
Okay.
It's easy reading.
It's a good
and-
read.
And if anybody's been to town meeting, it will actually say, oh, now I understand what he was saying, that type of thing. You know, the motion, somebody makes an amendment, somebody makes an amendment to the amendment, and then somebody wants to say, I want to amend the motion. No, that's out of order. And I call the question. And so it's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Just explain how you're running meetings. But let's do that. Let's do the initial meeting. I don't think let's do that and the Article 2, the town meeting, the how the town meetings run and stuff like that. So I think those two would be good.
Which two?
So Article 1, which is more definition of background, and then Article 2, which is town meeting. And with the understanding that we're looking at possibly adding a permanent second meeting in addition to special.
And that's only one small section you change in Article 2. It's just time of meeting. There would be 2 annual town meetings. So, you know what I mean?
Maybe, depending on whether...
Because
Where it now says one is in April or May,
we just say...
we might say that...
Because later on, it
late
talks
October,
about
early November.
specific town meeting warrants, this and that. Article 2 just says you're going to have a town meeting in April, May, or whatever.
Well, no, 2.7 would be warrant articles, so 2 is really long. Because 2 also talks about the structure of the meeting.
Yeah, so I think what we're doing is focusing on the 2 meetings is a change, but look at the entire section to see if there's anything else that you think
Right.
needs to be clarified. If it doesn't make sense to you and you're already involved in here, chances are we probably need to make some improvement.
Okay, that sounds like a plan.
And I think for, this is jumping ahead a little bit, when you look at Article 3, a lot of this depends on feedback from these other departments and commissions.
Yep.
So if the Board of Health looks at their section and says that's fine,
Then that's
end of
not-
discussion.
Right.
And we may be able to tick off half of these boards as not requiring any changes.
You bring up a good point. When I was discussing with the cemetery board, they were mentioning coming back to this group possibly February. What is our time? When I met with the library, I told them it would be beneficial to get anything they want early so it can be discussed and well thought out and not wait to the last minute where 2 weeks before the meeting we have requests from 9 boards to make major changes.
Do we have a requirement to publish our recommendation X amount of time in advance of the meeting?
So we would want to include it in the mailing of the warrant.
So everything needs to be finalized by the time the warrant goes out, which is early April.
It's right around the corner, really.
My concern is, I'm trying to tell them, the earlier you can get us your concerns, they don't have to be specific, this is what we exactly want, so that we can discuss it. I'm concerned that each board thinks independently and goes, well, we'll just wait till the end of March meeting, we'll just come in and we'll do our presentation. And then the end of March, we're here till 2 in the morning as board number 6 makes its presentation. So as we talk to boards, is it okay to say early is good?
We need
We're not gonna hold
we need
you
your
to it.
answer by December, by the end of December. That would be a
Okay.
better way.
So I will
With the understanding that they get continuing feedback, but we want their initial feedback.
How
so-
long does it take to put it through, like, before it would be mailed, town council and everything would go through it? Like, there would be a time
Yep.
in between the
Yep.
mailing and it needing to be complete, so it's reviewed by all necessary.
Yeah, and I want to keep our feet to the fire, but if we're not ready for the annual town meeting, this is going to our second
We
meeting.
could do that
The not-so-special second one.
Now it feels less stressful, right?
Point number 2, someone did bring up, anything that we put in is going to go through a lawyer to look at,
Yes.
correct?
Town council.
Will the commissions and councils and committees have access to that rewriting?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we're going to, just as we sent out the first version, If there's a specific section that we want immediate feedback, we'll set out the same distribution list. Clearly, at the end, we will do things, but really, it's like an employee evaluation. There should not be a surprise to a board when the final version is done. Everybody should know about it ahead of time so that we don't, they may not like it, but it shouldn't be a surprise.
But one board member did ask, is there going to be...
It's back and forth.
Yeah.
Back and forth.
You make a thing?
Yeah. And so say somebody I have no comment, but we made a change that, oh, by the way, we recognize it may affect their board. It's incumbent upon us to actually go back to them and say, you need to read this, we made this following proposed change.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I like the December idea, at least all the initial stuff.
Yeah.
So we can identify, this is a major area, we need to get this done by the end of January. These are minor things, we'll float them in between, because I just see us in March.
No.
At the high school auditorium, you know.
We'll
I think
have
so.
some other meetings going on.
That's right, yeah, the budget's going on and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
I mean, and I know it gets very busy before a town meeting, the financial stuff. I just don't want it to be at the end.
Yeah, no, it shouldn't be. Okay, any other items so we'll do Articles 1 and 2 at the next meeting,
Yep.
and then next meeting we'll figure out what's the appropriate section to look at after that, and just get through this different sections. In the meantime, if somebody has any feedback from a board, then that we'll have a little bit of feedback.
Continue contacting the boards. Okay, that sounds like a plan. Move to adjourn.
Before we do that, any public comment? Dave?
Just quickly, your final discussion about contacting other boards after you make any substantive changes that are not in their specific section of the charter was my only concern, and you've already stated that you will have that communication, because a change in, as you were talking about earlier, as to which board has control over what, so on and so forth, I can see changes coming down the pike that at least the board needs to be able to chime in on, as you said, once you come to your final draft.
Good. Any comment from the board? Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.